Welcome back to another camera channel. In this video, we're going to be talking about the Hollyland Pyro wireless video transmission system. Now, I'm not the first person to review these products, so I've actually had the benefit of being able to see other people's reviews and see the questions left underneath in the comments by people just like you. So I want to address probably the most common question I've seen on every single person's reviews. Do the Mars and Pyro systems work together? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. The Mars and the Pyros are two separate families of wireless video transmitters, so they don't talk to each other, if that makes sense. So the main differences between the two families is the Mars system can only use 2 hardware receivers and the Pyro system can use 4 hardware receivers. And when we're talking about screens, the Mars system has 5.5-inch screens and the Pyros have 7-inch screens. Really, it's up to you if you like 5 inches or 7 inches. I'll leave that question up to you. That being said, the Mars system is still a very viable system. If you've already invested in these, don't despair too much because these still work really well. You are obviously just limited to how many hardware receivers and your screen size. So you still have a bunch of models which still work with this system. I think you got like 2 screens, like the M1 Enhanced, and then you have all the other Mars like transmitters that came before this one, which is the Mars 4K. So you actually have a lot of choice, and maybe people may be selling them to upgrade to the Pyro. Who knows? So you may be picking up a bargain if you buy some of these pre-owned. But enough about the Mars series, let's talk more about the Pyros. So there's 3 main models in the Pyro series. We have the Pyro H here, which is an HDMI only system. The benefit of this one, it has an HDMI in and an HDMI loop out, which is super useful if you want to run your signal into a transmitter first and then run it into an external monitor. You'll hopefully bypassing any delay that the monitor may introduce into the signal flow. This is also the cheapest option out of the 3 and still has pretty much all the features that you're going to expect from this system, which is really good. So if you are working with only HDMI cameras and you're never going to use SDI ever, this might be a very good option for you. So like I said, we have an HDMI in and an HDMI loop out. On the other side, we have the on-off switch, which is a physical switch, which is really nice. We have a small menu screen and then the small rocking toggle switch to select between the menu items. There's also a USB-C port here, which is used for software updates, and you can also power the unit through this. Other options for power, you have the Sony MPF battery plate on the back or the locking DC input jack. The receiver is pretty much the same, but we just have HDMI out instead. And the USB-C port is also used as a UVC connection here. Moving on to the next level, we have the Pyro S, and this is SDI and HDMI. So looking at the transmitter here, we have an SDI in and an HDMI in. There's no loop out. So what you're going to need to think about is where you're putting this in the signal chain. You're going to have to put this after your external monitor unless you have some kind of splitter or maybe 2 SDIs or an SDI and an HDMI on your camera. So bear that in mind before you pick this up. You will need to think about how you're going to send the video signal into this and be able to monitor it at the same time. The Pyro S's have 3 antennas for some reason. And looking at the other sides, we still have the nice physical on-off switch, USB-C port, locking DC jack, Sony MPS style battery plate, and then on the front we have a larger display and then 3 buttons, a select button, an up button, and a down button. One thing to note though is you cannot power it via the USB-C here. It's only used for software updates, or on the receiver it is that UVC connection. The receiver is basically the same, except we have SDI out and HDMI out. And the good news is you can use the SDI out and the HDMI out at the same time, going to 2 different monitors if you like. But what you should know is you'll only get a 4K signal over the HDMI. The SDI is limited to 1080p 60 frames. And then the most advanced product in the lineup is the Pyro 7. And I have it here, stripped down as you would get it out of the box. This is with no accessories attached to it. This is a 7-inch screen, 1200 nits, so great for outside usage. On the back, we have SDI in, SDI out, HDMI in, and HDMI out, which is all the ports you're going to need. We also have the locking DC power jack, a headset jack if you want to monitor audio, the USB-C port for updating and UVC. And then on the top here, we have a nice physical sliding switch for power and 2 customizable function buttons with different feels on them so you know which one you're pressing. And just in case you couldn't guess, it is a nice touch screen. So all the menus and tools are available to you at a touch of a finger. By default, it has this double Sony NPF battery plate, but you can buy different ones. So you can buy a V-mount one or a gold mount one if you so choose. I think we're going to upgrade to the V-mount as we have way more V-mount batteries than we do Sony NPF batteries. And that will give us a nice all-in-one compact system that we can just hand off to anyone without having to worry about batteries and cables and everything like that. And as you can see here, there are optional accessories that you can buy to customize it a little bit more. And we'll go over them a little bit later. So the Pyros work on 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz bands, and they will swap between those to find the best kind of signal for you. If you're in the standard broadcast mode, there are 8 channels and 9 groups from A to I. And if you're in broadcast mode, you get 4 channels and still A to I as your group. So what's really nice is you can run multiples of these systems at the same time and use different channels in different groups. So you can have one camera in group A and another camera in group B, and those channels will be completely separate, which is very nice if you're running multicam. I haven't tested out how many you can do at the same time, but I'm guessing in broadcast mode, because there's only those 4 channels, I'm assuming you can only run 4 groups at the same time. Build quality wise, they're made out of a magnesium aluminum alloy, which tries to keep the weight down. I still think they're kind of very similar weight to the 4K, the Mars 4K. So they're still not super light. They're not plasticky. They're metal. So they seem like they're going to take a bit of a beating. But I wouldn't say these are too heavy, but I also wouldn't say that they're super lightweight either. One common thing I saw in other people's reviews is they're not that happy about how tall these antennas are, and they wish they were short like the puck style. I don't know if that's possible to do. I'm sure there's a reason why Hollyland designed them to be like this, but I'm not sure why these antennas and these antennas are different. That was never explained to me. I'm not really sure why, because these are definitely different. These are kind of fat and chunky, and these ones are thin and only bend in one direction. So we've been using them recently. We picked these up, I think, earlier in May this year. These ones we got recently within the last 2 months, and we've been using them on a few music videos with the Red V Raptor and an Arri Alexa Mini LF, and they've worked flawlessly. We love having SDI. Obviously, for the Red cameras and Arri, SDI is the best. What is nice about having one set of each kind of system here is that we've being able to cover all our bases. So we've got SDI transmitters on the cameras, SDI receivers going into larger production monitors, and then we skip out on the HDMI transmitter, but use the HDMI receiver on a custom-built director's monitor that I had previously. And then the Pyros just kind of exist by themselves as either an on-camera monitor, which is super useful, and a client monitor or director's monitor. Or in this case, when we had a camera on a jib, we just relied on the SDI transmitter, and we use a second Pyro as another monitor, which is really nice. So you can mix and match to match what you need for your production needs, but it's really nice that these are budget friendly, and you can do a lot with them, which is really nice. There is a thing about latency, so there are a few frames of latency at least with this. Hollyland says it's 50 milliseconds, and I would say it's fine for the most part, especially if you're just using it to preview the image and stuff like that. But maybe in very tense wireless follow focusing situations, it's not going to be the best. Obviously, this is not a really high-end system. It's still a budget system. So if you're doing that kind of work, you probably aren't looking at this kind of system anyway. But the other downside, I think, in terms of latency was because we were doing music videos and we're trying to look at how the singers are staying in sync with the song, if they need to enunciate more, if they're singing the right words at the right time. Because of that delay, it is a bit jarring. So, but all that aside, it's still a very good system, especially when you consider all the tools you're getting inside the Pyro 7 screen, and also the HollyView app, which you can use for free with any of the hardware transmitters. Now, we have had these for a little while, and we have updated them. Apart from the Pyro 7s, they don't have an update as of yet, but it's very easy to update. All you're going to need to do is download the file from the Hollyland website. And how I did it was I used the SD card from the Pyro 7. So it's a 32 gigabyte card. And I put it into a USB card reader just like this. And I also used the USB-A to USB-C connector that you get with all of the sets. And if you have the update file in the root folder of the SD card, all you need to do is plug it in and turn it on, and it will update for you automatically. It's very, very simple. The other thing about these is the UVC connection that you get on the back of all the receivers. Now, I saw some questions about how do you connect more than one to your computer or MacBook and things like that. So I tested it out. I'm not really a person that uses UVC. I'm more of an ATEM mini kind of guy. So I tested it out, and it is possible to connect more than one at the same time, but it did take a little while for OBS to recognize that there was 2 different devices. So this is how I did it. First, Hollyland say you have to use a USB-C to USB-A cable. I tried a lot. Pretty much none of them worked apart from this one, which is a USB-C to USB-A cable that I got in an Aperture MC. It's also the same one that you get in the MT Pro. So if you have any of those lights, you have a good cable that's going to work. Alternatively, if you are a photographer and you have one of these like tether tools cables, that also works as well. This is a lot longer than this one, a lot more beefy, but this one definitely works. So if you're looking for a cable which is definitely going to work with UVC, it's going to be this. The only annoying thing is, because we have newer M1 and M2 Max, we only have USB-C. So I had to use the official Apple dongle here to get this to work. And it did work, but to get two to work at the same time, I had to connect the first one, and then after connecting the second one, disconnect the first one, so then the second one would work, and then reconnect the first one, and then I got like two devices. It wouldn't let me add a new device in OBS. It just didn't recognize that there was two going on at the same time. So I'll say one more time. Plug in the first one, add it as a device into OBS, plug in your second one, pull out your first device, then add a new device in OBS. Hopefully then it will recognize a second UVC video connection. Once that's working, you can then connect your first one back in, and hopefully they both work at the same time. One interesting thing though is they aren't in sync. Or at least they weren't for me, which is very strange. I was using the same cameras next to each other. There was nothing like in between the signal chain to make them not in sync, but the second device was definitely lagging behind the first. But like I said, I'm not a UVC guy. Maybe that affects you more than it affects me. So not a downside for me. I'm probably never going to use that feature. But yeah, just letting you know if you were having trouble with that. My advice would be just to use an ATEM and connect them with either SDI or HDMI. So let's take a closer look at the monitors. So like I said, this is the configuration. You'll get it straight out of the box, no accessories, works very well. All you need to do is just connect it to your camera somehow. What's nice is it does have the kind of ARRI locking pin kind of situation down here. So at least your monitor won't be twisting everywhere. I don't think it's much heavier than a lot of other monitors. It's probably slightly heavier because it has more hardware on the inside. Using this as an on-camera monitor, it is very nice, especially with how bright it is. So let's look at some accessories. These are these really nice rosewood handles. I believe the rosewood handles. They're super ergonomic and super nice to hold. Very, very good placement of where you need to put your fingers. They also have connections here if you wanted to add a neck strap so you can kind of relax it. And what's also really cool is on each handle, you have a magnetically attached Allen key on each side. So you actually have two of these, which is really cool. And they're used to tighten the handle. So if you ever need to take the handle off, for example, to get to the SD card, which is one of the negatives that you can't access the SD card with the handle still on, at least you have an Allen key. It has this lovely screen protector / sun hood, which you can easily open up like this and get a better view if you're in very bright conditions. And what's cool is if you don't want it, you can easily take it off just by pulling on here and it comes off just like that. So that's really cool. So it is really bright, as you can see, 1200 nits. And that actually may be one of the negatives, is that because it's so bright, it may mislead you into seeing the exposure a little bit differently than what's actually been recorded on your camera. So I think the first time we used this, a lot of people were debating the exposure, and I was saying the camera is definitely saying we're underexposed, but on the screen it looked fantastic, and I was like, no, look at the screen, it looks perfect. And I'm like, okay, well, the camera says differently, so let's just say I was right. It was a little bit too underexposed, and the screen definitely made the image look better than it actually was. So just bear that in mind. Remember that there are tools on here. You can easily check the false color to make sure that your exposure is great. But before we go through all the features, just think about what this is replacing. So I'm going to show you what we've been using before and what we still are using. This is our other director's monitor setup that we have. You can kind of see here, if I just swap hands, you can kind of see here the size difference of what we're dealing with here. So this is a cage from Latency, and we have the V-mount, a small V-mount battery on the back with the Pyro H sandwiched in between, and that's connected to the Portkeys monitor with the Portkeys BD1, and that's powering both of those. So this is a setup I made maybe a year or two ago, maybe a little bit longer. This is how we're using the Pyro H in our little ecosystem here. And this is now what we can replace most of this with, especially if we get the V-mount battery plate. We can make this a lot more ergonomic and small and easy to use, especially if we're going to hand it off to someone who doesn't really hold these for a lot of the time. This can be a little bit overwhelming, a little bit scary. So that's a benefit. But I think going back to the screen brightness, you may be able to see the difference here. This Hollyland Pyro 7 is definitely less contrasty. The blacks seem to be a bit more lifted, and it just looks brighter overall. It might be hard to tell because of the exposure on the camera is a little bit affecting it maybe, but if you, it is slightly noticeable, I can see it, and I can definitely see it in real life as well. So it's only slight, but it is enough to kind of make people misjudge what they're looking at. But what's cool is if we put these side by side here and do a little clap test, I think the delay between the two, I mean, they're the same system, but I think if anything, this one should be, in theory, a little bit lagging behind this one. But we'll test it on the screen now if I was right. To negate the brightness problem, it would have been very nice if there was more options in the settings to change what's happening with the monitor. So at the moment, we only have like a massive brightness and then individual RGB options. Kind of wish there was a contrast and maybe a gamma option, or maybe even like a color gamut option or something like that. We could change, something like that, which will give us a bit more control. Maybe even a calibration option. Maybe they'll add that in later firmware. I'm not sure. Overall, this is pretty good. If you're just going to give it to someone who needs to look at what's happening on the camera, this is perfectly fine. And if they're a bit more tech savvy, they can enjoy all of these lovely tools. We have waveforms, we have vector scopes, a histogram, focus peaking, zebras to show overexposed areas, false color, which is probably one of the best options on there, 3D LUT support with up to 5 custom LUTs that you can import, image zoom, aspect ratio marks, grid patterns and crosshairs, anamorphic D-squeeze, image flip, image rotation, image overlay or onion skin mode, and then video recording. Now to use the onion skin mode, all you need to do is hit the little scissors icon like that, and then activate the overlay mode. And then I can see a ghost image of what the picture was, so it's easy to then line up yourself back to that same location. Let's say you have like a group of people or whatever, or you're doing a complex move and you need to start exactly the same place or end in the exact same place. You can use the onion skin mode to kind of get you back in your marks. And then the video record mode, well, that is very low bit rate, but maybe it's a cool way of recording like your camera menu or something like that. Here's what we're seeing out of the camera right now. And then here is what this is recording. You can tell me if you'd use this video file or not. It's probably fine for social media, but I don't think it's going to stand up to much heavy grading or anything like that. It's going to be very, very low bit rate. The memory card that they gave with us is only 32 gigabytes, so expect this file to be very, very small in file size. It's probably useful to note that when you hit record on here, you're not recording the Hollyland UI. You're only going to be able to record the UI of the camera if that's what your HDMI out is set to. On the wireless option here, we have the option to switch between transmitter and receiver. We then have broadcast mode or normal mode. And like I said before, in broadcast mode, you can send a signal up to a maximum of 4 hardware receivers, but you still have those 9 groups to play with. In the normal mode, you can send up to 2 hardware receivers and 2 phone apps or iPad apps, whatever you want to use. Also with those 9 groups. Fan noise isn't bad, although if you're very close to it, I think you will be able to hear it. So if you're using in-camera audio only, maybe just think about the placement of any of the transmitters or the monitors. The 2 options you have are auto and low. And on the top of the screen, you can see what kind of signal you're getting and your frame rate, which from my FX3 right now says 1080p and 60 frames. One thing interesting to note here is that just want to bring your attention to these hardware receivers have 4K written on them, okay? So they have a 4K badge. The Pyro 7 does not have a 4K badge, and that is because from what I can tell, this cannot receive a 4K signal, like it downscales it. This says 1080p 30 up here, and this one is using the Pyro H, and when I swap over to the signal here, it says that it's in 4K. So that's an interesting thing to know, that this will only get a 1080p signal while this can get 4K. So if you didn't want to use this screen and you wanted to use a screen that can get 4K, then you could just get the hardware transmitters. Little bit of a downside because this is going to be like a 4K system, right? But even though the Pyro 7 accepts 4K into this transmitter, it can't receive it, which is very, very interesting. It downscales it. So a little bit of a downside there, but something for you to be aware of. So that was my review of the Hollyland Pyro video transmission system. Personally, I think these are a great option for like solo operators or small companies. Having the flexibility of being able to choose like HDMI only or SDI and HDMI. Like I said, we've used these on high-end cinema cameras like Arri and Red, and they work fantastically for what we needed them to do. Yes, that is that latency like I described earlier. This is not marketed as a top-of-the-line system. It is in that kind of budget to small company range. Hollyland does have more high-end units than this, and they do have less latency and more features. So just bear that in mind, you know. This isn't going to be a Teradek like killer or anything. It's not marketed to be like that. But if you need a nice budget wireless transmission system, this is great, especially with these screens, having those tools available to you. If you don't have a camera which has false color or anamorphic de-squeezes, the onion skinning feature is really awesome. You can get it with this screen and it works as a transmitter or a receiver for you. So you've got plenty of options. If you don't want to invest in things like the screen, you know, you can always just buy just a transmitter and then rely on like iPads and iPhones and just use the HollyView app. That's still a really good way of being able to monitor what your camera's doing. And more than likely, you have a very capable phone in your pocket which can run that app. So you can save money just like that. I want to say a quick thank you to Hollyland for sending us the Pyro S and the Pyro 7s, since we already had the Pyro H's, which is why I can show you all of them like this. And if you liked the video, please hit that like button down below, subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.